Welcome to the Mr. Beacon podcast. We got a really special episode this week. We've spent hundreds of episodes looking at the components of IoT and Ambient IoT, but this time we're going to look at how the whole thing comes together. I'm doing this podcast with Nitin Kamboj, who is the head of strategy for digital supply chain at Royal Mail. This is an organization that is 500 years old, that has deployed a bunch of really interesting technologies. But for them, it has to work, because when it doesn't work, people get upset. It has an impact on all of the businesses, all of the people in the United Kingdom. So the stakes are high, and they've done an amazing job. What I'm so impressed about with what Royal Mail has done is the way they've sequenced the project, the design of the solution, and I hope you get that from my conversation with Nitin. So enjoy. So Nitin, welcome to the Mr. Beacon podcast.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for having me.
Well, I am super excited. We cover a lot of different technologies on the podcast. It's sponsored by Wiliot, but I make a point of trying to include alternative technologies, competitive technologies. But this week, we're going to focus on Ambient IoT and Wiliot's technology, because you work for Royal Mail, and we've just announced together the deployment of Wiliot's technology across the whole of the Royal Mail post and parcel network in the United Kingdom. You architected the solution. You, working with an amazing team, developed it and deployed it. And in my opinion, this is a really historic use of this technology that I think will change the way businesses operate in the future. And it's wonderful to see Royal Mail as an institution that is approximately 500 years old. Started off in the first customer was Henry VIII. First technical innovation was the postage stamp, the famous penny black. I mean, that's pretty innovative. And now Royal Mail has deployed roughly 2.5 million Wiliot IoT pixels across its network. So I want to talk to you about that and really understand it at all the levels that I think make sense and are interesting. What is it that you have done at Royal Mail? What is Royal Mail using Ambient IoT for? Why? What are the business needs and the benefits, and how? Let's get into what it took. What's the design of the solution? What are the alternatives that you looked at, and how did you develop it? But maybe what. In summary, you're tagging these rolling cages, right?
Yep. That's correct.
And you call them Yorks?
We call them Yorks.
Why do you call them Yorks?
Interesting trivia around it. York is a city in England, as most listeners would know. Effectively, they were, what I like to believe, I'm not sure how much it is correct, but I'm led to believe that they were first used in that facility.
Okay.
And when they started to pop over in other parts of our network, somebody would ask, what's that? And they started calling, that's York, because that's from York.
Okay.
And that's how the name has kind of continued, and it's still date. They have been called Yorks.
So these are metal cages. They're on wheels. They're, yep. 5 or 6 feet high, something like that. And they basically carry the letters and the parcels around the
Absolutely.
network.
So all our network movements within our network happens on these containers. Letters, as you said, they go in plastic trays. Those trays end up being in these containers, as well as the parcels. Mm-hmm. And effectively, any movement within our network, we use them to transport the items from one place to another including our customer sites. We do operate other ways like pallets, loose load, but this is the main integral part of how we move items within our network.
So these York rolling cages, in my mind, they're like the white blood cells that carry the oxygen around the body of the United Kingdom postal network. And in this case, it's not oxygen, it's letters and parcels. So these things are full of letters and parcels.
Absolutely.
And then, and you're tracking them. How do you track them using Wiliot technology?
Yep. So there's an interesting history around it. We have been looking at solutions in this space. What we ended up is with a Wiliot tracking solution. And what we have done is deployed the Wiliot smart tags onto these containers, as made of digital association between them. And then effectively, we have ambient IoT reader devices currently to begin with in our vehicles. Mm-hmm. So when these containers with pixel tags, when they're loaded onto our vehicles, they move around within our network, RMG and customer sites, we get a snail trail of their movement across all of them, not just one or two, thousands of sites. We have thousands of containers. We have already tagged more than 800,000 containers.
So and each one has got a unique ID, right? It's got
Absolutely.
An asset ID that's being tracked. Why is it important to know where they are? Because that's fundamentally what the system does.
Yeah. So as I said, thousands of sites, 800,000 containers. They eventually go from a place from customer. You get the container with full of items, mm-hmm. either letters or parcel. It goes through our supply chain, goes to our final mile sites, and items get delivered. But then you need to loop that back to the upstream into the supply chain, mm-hmm. so that the flow continues. Mm. Because if it's all one way, you would just end into everything in the final mile. Your customers don't have enough containers to ship. Your middle mile sites don't have enough to move the items around. So there's a continuous evolving life cycle that we need to maintain of these containers to bring them upstream to the sites. And that's where it becomes critical, even more so critical during the autumn pressure around Christmas, where we see a spike in volumes of parcels and letters go through our network. And what we essentially want is how more efficiently we can manage within our operations with the same set of containers.
So if you don't have the rolling cages where they need to be, then basically the mail stops. You've got nothing to put the letters and parcels in. So it's really important that they are distributed and available, so that there aren't delays.
Absolutely. It compromises everything. It compromises our customer service, it compromises our middle mile, and it compromises kind of the logjam that we might have in our final mile. So maintaining that balance across all sides, continuous movement or repatriation is essential to running a smooth business. Because if we can't supply to our customers, they can't ship the items, the end user is impacted, and the customer would say, Rollmail is not able to meet the service. So at the heart of it is the universal service obligation that Rollmail has to follow, has to meet, and that makes, you could say, one price goes anywhere, and those kind of essential service promises that we have made under the USO. When everything is moving within those containers, you need to make sure that the heart of those things is working like a clockwork, so that it never stops, because a small interruption could cause hours and hours of disruption, or it might exponentially increase our cost because we might find other ways to continue to and maintain our quality.
Okay, yeah. So when you have to mitigate a shortage, then there's delays, but there's also extra cost in doing that. You talked about having the containers upstream and downstream. So what does that mean? What is upstream in this context?
So customers. So we are essentially, if you talk about the end-to-end supply chain, it starts from manufacturing to the delivery at the doorstep. We are at the final end of it when a customer or our customer's customer effectively places an order online for an item to be delivered to their home address. that's the role that we play in, that we ingest the items from these large wholesale, retail, you could say customers of ours who basically give the item or they trust roll mail to deliver it on time with the promises that we have given to our customers and our customers have given to the end users, essentially. And that's where I think it's essential to maintain that life cycle, that the parcel journey ends from receiving it from customer down to the doorstep. But the things that we use to move that item, which is our containers, they still need to go back so that the next cycle of items could go through.
Right.
And that's kind of a repeat. So this is where it's a cyclic loop that we need to continue and maintain across thousands of customer sites and thousands of roll mail sites.
So so an example customer might be some kind of retailer who wants to ship product to their customers, and you would give them some rolling cages, just enough that they're basically, they have what they need to put the packages in. How did you know how many they needed before, and what does putting all of these online with Ambient IoT do to change that?
So the contract has a level of understanding about how much items we expect from these customers to be shipped into our network. We try and translate that into our container profile, that to ship X number of parcels, how many containers they would need. And what we try to do is our local sites, which are point connections for the customer collection sites as well, they are in constant touch of, are you in need of more containers? Or customers reach out to say that they have a spike in volume and they have limited containers. So for the next shipments across the day, week, they might need more. So it's a very manual process at the moment. There's no proper record of it, or I should say before we implemented the Ambient IoT, there's phone calls involved, there's our emails involved, and there are people who just are looking to fulfill those requests on an ongoing basis. So that's the nature of before Ambient IoT. What we look to do, or the aim is that we want to try and as much as automate, orchestrate that process, that there are less emails, there are less phone calls, and there's sufficient amount of containers at all places. Because what we don't want to do is either oversupply, because oversupply means that some other part of the operation would get compromised, or undersupply a customer, because then the service to them would get compromised. So it's finding that right balance.
Yes. And when you talk about the fact that, if you give customer A too many rolling cages, then maybe customer B doesn't get enough. Then you start to realize, oh my goodness, this can potentially be super complicated, and it makes sense for it to put it online. Now, you mentioned that you've tagged over 800,000 of these rolling cages, and you're finding more. And the reading is done in the vehicles that move these around. How many vehicles do you have? And for people not familiar with them, how big are these things?
Yep. So we're talking about approximately anywhere between 6,000 to 7,000 vehicles. These are large trucks,
right?
Ranging from 7.5-ton size vehicles to a long trailer that could carry up to 100 of these containers that we are talking about, and thousands of parcels. So they operate across the entire of the UK geography. The deployment has been a very, I would say, interesting challenge, because how do you deploy new equipment on the vehicles which are also performing operational duty? And from that perspective, it's the larger fleet that we have currently started with. But in terms of that extension of that Ambient IoT environment, when it goes down to a parcel level, we might want to extend it to a good 50,000 strong fleet. That includes the final mile van.
Okay, so you have the raw mail vans, beautiful red vehicles that take to the packages on the last part of the journey to people's homes, and that would be kind of the next step. But to be clear, today it's Bluetooth readers in these massive multi-ton
Big trucks.
vehicles, and thousands of those that are already deployed. And what are the readers that you're using, just out of interest?
So we worked collectively with Wiliot and one of the manufacturers called ERM.
ERM, okay.
Yep. And we developed a bespoke device, not in terms of technology bespoke, but bespoke for an automotive environment, because we wanted something that can last the harsh weather of, you could say, being exposed to snow, rain, because some of the time these vehicles, they are open. So the rain, the moisture, can it last over there? The vibrations that you get caused by the vehicle moving. So we developed that bespoke device.
And voltage spikes as well.
Voltage spikes, current spikes.
Yeah.
It's just as tougher an operational environment that you can experience.
Yeah.
Completely different to any equipment that you would deploy inside a building. So it does need to land into those harsh environments. So this is where ERM, who have a good experience in telematics type of devices, so they brought in their expertise around developing equipment for the vehicles. They worked with Wiliot to have the technology expertise, and obviously role mail. From our perspective, we provide the design needs or considerations. The temperature range in UK could go very extreme. We have historical temperature extremes of, you could say, minus 20 degrees in some places, or the extreme highs of 40 degrees. But that's just the atmospheric environment. But what about the environment within these large trucks? Because they have somewhat like a solar cooker or kind of a...
You're putting it in an oven,
in a
basically.
chamber oven, exactly. So the 40 degrees outside could easily translate into 50, 55 degree inside a vehicle because of that chamber kind
Centigrade we're talking about.
Absolutely, centigrade.
Yeah.
And so we wanted a device that would last
Yes.
and also perform within that environment. And we wanted a fit and forget device.
Right.
We didn't want it to go back again and again, manage it, fix it. We wanted it fixed once, and all the work in a proper IoT world could be done all remotely. So that's the aspiration. We are good long way. We have done majority of our deployment. It's still in progress, as the scale would always demand or have challenges associated around it.
Right. So how many of these ERM, Bluetooth, Ambient IoT, Bluetooth readers are there in each of these trucks?
So in total, we are looking at 20,000 odd devices across that large fleet. We had to go categorically in terms of design, the requirements for each of the vehicle type. So the smaller vehicles can manage with two. Ideally, they could have managed with one, but you always build some sort of a fail-safe, like how you do a Wi-Fi in a building.
Right.
You don't have just one Wi-Fi access point. You have some sort of a fallback device nearby. So that's where we went with the smaller vehicles with two. The larger trucks, the ones which are single deck, we went with 3 devices because their length could go anywhere between 10 to 15 meters, the length of the trailer. And then we have something very unique. I'm not sure I'm seeing much that elsewhere, what we call as a double-deck trailer. It's like a double-deck bus where you have a stack of containers that would go on a lower deck, and then an equal proportion stack of containers that would go on the upper deck. And we have a lift mechanism that you load the upper deck, it gets lifted up, and then you load the lower deck. And in that scenario, we had to go with 6 devices.
Okay.
Because
3 on each level.
3 on each levels. Same length, approximately between anywhere that around 10 to 15 meters, varying because of the different specs we have bought over time.
Yeah. And just sort of operationally, the thing that I think is really important is that you don't ask your the workers in the sorting depots or the drivers to do anything, right? this you're sensing, not scanning, the presence of these trailers, which I think is important because it means, well, A, it's less work, but B, it's better compliance because human beings are human and they sometimes forget to do things. And so you don't have that issue. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. So the two main briefs whenever we have looked around the solution were that it does not require any user input, whether it be the driver, be it the dock operator, or be anybody else. We want it to work seamlessly. And the other brief was that it should not just cater for roll mail sites, it should also cater for our, you could say, customer sites. How do you, because when we talk about balancing that upstream and downstream, you need to get a good handle of the numbers at both the places, not just one place. So with that brief, we looked at different technologies. We looked at RFID, we looked at BLE, and within that evolution, we stumbled into Wiliot around that time. For me personally, I thought Wiliot brought the best of the two worlds together. Yes, there's a certain compromise on some of the RFID element, but it brings the best of both worlds, which was a perfect fit for our use case. The way it helped us, as you said, it ticked those boxes that, yes, you can deploy it at roll mail sites, but through a level of telematics or GPS tracking, you also get a sense of where the items are being dropped to a customer sites.
Very interesting. And I want to drill down into that a little bit more. And I don't want to turn this into a knocking the competition thing because I try and be editorially impartial, but I am biased. I work for Wiliot, so I love what we do and I think it's important. But I'm wondering if you can compare Ambient IoT with a battery-powered Bluetooth solution. What are the pros and cons of that? And can you compare Ambient IoT with RFID and the pros and cons of that? Because it's never one-sided.
No.
There's always positives and negatives on both sides. And you're a solution architect. You're thinking about the business requirements, and it's going to be different in different situations. But for tracking of containers in a vehicle, what was your assessment of the pros and cons of, say, battery-powered Bluetooth versus battery-free Bluetooth? Let's start there.
So purely just answering that question, we didn't see much difference between the two, batteryless and battery-free. The big factor was not from a technology perspective. The big difference was the cost element of it, the replacement element of it. Because the moment you introduce a power source or a power-dependent IoT device, you need to look at how would you replace that power source when it runs out. So when the battery dies, are you looking at another extensive round of deployment in an operational environment? So what's the complexity around it? So I would say that was the big tick for us, that being batteryless, you have to do it once. Yes, obviously you would have to repair things that have gone wrong, but theoretically these are expected to last multiple years or without damage, probably indefinitely. So once you deploy a battery-free technology and you have the source to energize them all the time, you're just done in once. So that was one of the key, I would say, differentiator. I think when we looked at the solution, we didn't look at just for container tracking. We said, okay, let's step back. Let's adopt a technology that could do multiple different use cases and track them. So we invest in it once rather than be use case dependent on containers now and then a few years down the line, think about, how can we deploy this on our parcels? So the moment you have battery, you're introducing the bulkiness. You're introducing how would you recycle it. You are introducing elements of, okay, you have this technology for your containers and asset, or what about parcels? Then you have duplication and everything. So this is where, as I said, when we stumbled onto Wiliot, the three things that attracted us the most: the form factor. It's small, or it can be easily extended to the parcel. So that was a big tick for us. Or second, batteryless. That solves us the complex deployment cycles that we would have to go through. So that's another tick for us. And the third element, I think bringing both the RFID and the benefits of BLE, the affordability aspect also rose up quite significantly. Because thousands of roll mill sites, you can put in RFID infrastructure all you want, and you can manage it, maintain it, even though it might be expensive. It's one-time kind of a capital investment. You can't do any of that at your customer sites. You can't deploy that solution at third-party sites that might be helping you with your supply chain. Like the custom brokers that we have, where we receive items from international, you could say, our customers, or we ship items internationally. So how do you find a solution that tick all those boxes? And this is where, with a small compromise, for which we might still end up using technologies within the RFID space, but overarching the big, you could say, proportion of our use cases were very easily met by selecting Wiliot. And essentially that led us to say, okay, it's a good candidate for a solution, not just for our immediate use case, but also what's coming down the line. When we deploy this on parcels, when we ship them through our network, would we be able to see them? We had a very interesting example of where we shipped some of these tags in our vehicles that was already fitted with the equipment, and you could see a large number of items being shipped through that truck, not just containers. And that threw us away a bit because we thought our data logic wasn't working correctly. But when we investigated, we found, no, exactly, these were actual Wiliot IoT pixels in thousands moving through that vehicle. And I think roughly the number was around 3,000 of those pixels moving through that vehicle.
So the tags are called IoT pixels, and you found that for some reason someone had shipped a reel of these things, and so they were showing up in huge numbers. That's fascinating. Let's go back to RFID.
Yeah.
Very mature technology, kind of the last major Gen 2 update was the turn of the millennium. So it's seasoned. And it's getting broad deployment, especially at the item level where the tags are very, very low cost. What persuaded you that Ambient IoT was the right way to go for Royal Mail, for your use cases versus RFID?
So one of the, as I said, it's implemented vastly in the industry. Not just, you could say, postal industry, but across the different retail and others. So it's very mature. The one big limitation that we saw from an RFID perspective, that you have to let the item go through a particular path of your building. Where
like a choke point.
Like a choke point, where you have deployed that infrastructure for it to be read. Now that means all the exit and entry points in your site, you need to kind of have that technology deployed. So that kind of exponentially grows when you have large warehouses. Then you miss out about, how would you track that at your customer site? We looked at deploying RFID infrastructure in our vehicles, but the installation of that can be very complex. It again introduces more points of failure. So from that point of view, we said, okay, even though how mature RFID is, to tick some of those boxes about the full trail of items being picked up from roll mill site and being delivered to customer or any other site in our network, you need to go with Ambient IoT. So that was probably the tipping, you could say, reason for us to stop it. Otherwise, for certain use cases where you need to know what exactly is in front of me, that's still RFID. We are not immune to that fact. We understand that there might be applications of RFID within roll mill, but majority of our use cases are more affordability perspective, and in terms of coverage perspective, are better delivered by Ambient IoT. So you scale that scope significantly of opportunities that it can do. We carry around thousands of devices. All our posties carry a postal digital assistant.
And this postal digital assistant, this is like a PDA, personal digital assistant, or a phone type device?
Phone type device is exactly. It's Android-based devices. We're going to potentially look at whether these devices could also, in a you could say seamless, automated way, in an ambient environment way, can still read these containers.
Yes.
So because our footprint is not limited to these thousands of sites, and the challenge being that these sites would open up and go down. Knowing the exact position of it, knowing the exact inventory in real time, would give us a better challenge of, okay, we know where the assets are, we know which sites have surplus, we know which sites are in dire need of it now. How do we orchestrate the vehicle movements, either the existing ones, or if we need to put in extreme cases, new ones, to get them to the places that they need.
So just to wrap up the RFID comparison, it sounds like you didn't want to just have a limited number of choke points, and because I'm assuming the cost of the readers and that infrastructure was a factor. Is that
it
fair?
is? It is. As I said, with every choke point, it goes exponential. The number of choke points, number of sites. It would have essentially made the business case unaffordable.
Right. Well, let's talk about the business case, because I think I've got huge respect for what you've done, because we have hundreds of customers and quite a few who've experimented with and love the use cases, but only a few of them have actually been able to get this to scale to very large scale, like you have done. And I think part of it is when there's a technology that is part of a new wave, then you're dealing with a lot of skepticism from people in your own organization, and in particular, your financial team, your CFO. His job is to be the brake, and the thing that I think was masterful on your side is if you look at Post and Parcel, there's all sorts of amazing use cases which you've talked about doing in the future, tracking letters and parcels and being able to sense the temperature of those things. And they're all revenue upside opportunities. But you focused and you started on basically efficiency and cost reduction. Can you talk a bit more about the rationale behind taking that approach?
Yeah. So my role has been to kind of look at the middle mile operations of Royal Mail and look at what are the key digital transformation could we introduce in that space. We have a large, extensive automation network where we scan the items through our, you could say, the large machines that we have, the two big hubs, and a lot of machine automation in our mail centers. Through that, we get a good, accurate record of where the items were last seen. So all the focus has been around giving customer the notifications about where the item has gone through the pipeline, but not necessarily a full view to operations to say, yeah, we have seen it last processed there, but is it on time to be delivered to the next site? We have those kind of gaps in between at the moment. So the main, you could say, aspiration was to create that visibility of parcel in between those scans to say, how is it moving between those sites, between those scans? And once you know that information, once you have that additional data, you can do a lot of different things with it. You would generate the insights that you have never seen before, because the element of a surprise, which could be, items, today we are going to have a spike at one site, is known upfront. You know it in advance that this many items have been processed in your upstream site or customer has sent here. How many are expected to hit the site? You can understand it from the resourcing element of it, that are you resourcely equipped enough based upon what you have done in the past. So if you have processed 10,000 items in a given site, in a given time frame, what sort of a resource profile did you require for it? what sort of a vehicle movements you require to move that item. So you get all that granular level of information all centrally, not just limited to the people who are actually operating things on the ground. So the lens that it would create for us within our operation would be significant. And that's where first we would have started with, as you said, operational efficiency. But once we get the handle of the data, we get to understand a lot more about what this can offer us. We would generate more and more, you could say, insights for not just for our operations, but also our sending customers, to let them know in advance that, okay, by the way, you may want to inform your customers that a certain set of parcels might get delayed because unfortunately our vehicle has been in a breakdown or it has had a road traffic accident. Currently, we are not necessarily sure what items could be in there.
Right. You know that the vehicle's had a problem, but here you have the data to tie it potentially back to the parcel. That's impacted. But I think, and just at one basic level, my understanding is that the data that you have, you can simply look at, do I have the right number of vehicles? Do I have the right size of vehicles? And so you potentially have opportunities to cut the capital associated with vehicles. You can right size the vehicles. Yep. You can potentially save on fuel and allocation of labor to moving the things around. So it seems very basic, tracking a rolling cage, but actually it's like it's giving you this real-time visibility. I hate to use the term X-ray, but because that implies a snapshot, but you have this kind of continuous live view of the way things are operating. One of the things that I want to... go ahead.
Just onto that, to put the context around it, because somebody might think, okay, why is that important? Obviously, you only depart the vehicle when it is full. Why you're departing half-empty vehicles? And that's a very interesting context for postal operators around the world, that where, for example, in UK, where we abide by USO, Universal Service Obligation, we have to deliver items on time. It does not necessarily mean that the vehicle can wait until it is full. The vehicle has to depart on time so that the items could make their onward connection and get delivered to the destination on time. So our network is scheduled more around time-based, like how a train would leave on time. The aeroplane would leave on time. It won't wait for being full. It has to leave on time. So from those elements, you need to understand what's the pattern or the trend over the time. And that's where, as you said, understanding that day in, day out, you implement that intelligence back into your network planning to say, okay, by the way, we have scheduled these many departures from this site to A to site B. Do you really need 4? Or could we manage with 3? Or do we still need 4, but you could, as you said, you can drop down the vehicle size to be more efficient. Getting more efficient means you are utilizing them well, not just reducing the operational cost, but also from environment and sustainability perspective, you bring your carbon emissions way down. So I think that's the initial core for us. And that's where once you start to understand those patterns and behaviors, you would be able to establish what needs to change to meet our business objectives and targets while delivering it in a sustainable manner.
So I think that's a good answer to why do this. And I think we've given a sense of what at least is being done today. I'd like to talk a bit about where you're planning on taking it into the future. But maybe there's a few more details we can add to the how. One of the things that I really love about what you've done is that you've got redundancy in the tagging. You've got people will see the videos of this and see there's actually not one tag on every rolling cage, but there's 3 tags. And it may be kind of grandiose, but I always think of like the Apollo mission where they had 3 computers just in case one fails. And so you've basically got redundancy. You've got failover because of the harsh conditions. If one of those chips gets smashed, you could spend a lot of money on harden the tags, but the tags are sufficiently cheap that you can just put 3 of them on, and you have that redundancy. So that's one level of thing. But maybe we should just talk a bit about the software architecture. So does Royal Mail have a digital control tower? What is a digital control tower, if you have one, and how is that connected with the Ambient IoT software? Because Ambient IoT isn't just a tag, it's a network of readers, and it's also a cloud as well, right?
Yep, absolutely. So the key aspect for us was that we can't just rely on one data set, which is where the containers are. You need to enrich that with other information that we have for our network, that what are the contents of that container. Mm-hmm. Without that, it becomes kind of, yes, it's still an important information, but it gets restricted to asset management, but not necessarily the supply chain delivery.
And that's a really key thing. I think one of the barriers to adoption of this technology has been that asset management is kind of in its own world. The people that manage these reusable transport items are separated from essentially the supply chain aspect, and you've joined them up.
Yeah, it's a nested doll effect. Eventually, we are in the business of delivering items. So everything has to be looked at from the focus of how the item is moving through our network. I think that was this big sea change, and why we selected Wiliot, why we looked at all the different solutions, and why this all made sense, because our focus was look at the parcel. How do you get the information as much as possible about the parcel's journey through our network? What role Wiliot would play in that place? And that was what was the main, you could say, jigsaw in our element. Mm-hmm. That, we have all the data about where we are scanning the items, we are taking it from customers, delivering it to the end point, but we have the missing link in between about how do we join the dots from last seen to have that live visibility of the item. And from that business architecture point of view, we wanted all that data to come into a Royal Mail environment. We are developing a digital twin of Royal Mail, multiple dashboards into what we call a digital control tower, not just for one business use case, but more for enterprise-wide view, where every business area is looking from the data from the same source perspective. Because what we didn't want to build was isolated elements of solutions scattered around. We don't want systems where same system or another system is reporting a value X, whereas another system is reporting Y. We want to bring them all into that common place. So we have a lot of information already about the items going through our network, through the scans, associating it with the machine information about which items are in which container. We get the information about association that this particular item is in this container now. But then another element, which is where Wiliot helped us, was that we can now track that as a cluster moving across our network. You could see those items because you can see that container, you've joined the other information, and that gives you the entire flow. How does it help? You can tell the site which is processing it to say, you processed the item, but it hasn't left the site. Do you want to see something on the ground to say why it hasn't left the site? You can let the site which is expected to receive that, by the way, there are these many containers with these items ready for you to receive. Either they're on their way, you could see them, or they're going to bring about. So to get all those insights, it was key for us that we take the niche skills of Ambient IoT, Wiliot Cloud Platform, those core, you could say, analytics that you generate, ingest them into our platforms, and then make that wider enterprise view. Because that's where the value gets extracted. In alone, as you said, asset management would be just an island in itself. It would have its own benefits significantly, but you bring that into a joined up, you could say, organization, you need to bring in the other data sources. So then you can go from the network plan to asset management using the same sort of capabilities, what we are terming as the digital twin of Royal Mail a digital control tower.
Very good. So last thing I want to ask you about is the future. And you said that one of the things that influenced you to adopt Ambient IoT was not just low-cost visibility in real time for rolling cages. It was other things. What are your plans, thoughts, aspirations in terms of how this technology will be applied in Royal Mail in the future?
So what we perform at the moment is the last leg of the bigger supply chain, if we want to call it. The bigger supply chain, what I mean is items being manufactured in the manufacturing house, they're getting shipped to large retailers, somebody online placing an order, and retailer then dispatching that item through a postal provider, be it any country, and then it getting delivered to the doorstep. So for me, the end-to-end supply chain is manufacturing to doorstep. Currently with Wiliot, just with containers, we are delivering the middle mile aspect of that last leg. I think collectively, or this ambient IoT, whether all the major players in this need to start looking at how can we bring the cost of the solution or share the cost of the solution upstream in the pipeline, go all the way back so that it becomes seamless, that you could track the item just using the same technology, just using the same kind of elements from manufacturing all the way to the doorstep.
Yes. So build it into the product as it's being made. That's kind of your vision of the future, which I absolutely agree with. And given all the standards work, this with IEEE and Ambient IoT going into Wi-Fi, and with 3GPP, with Ambient IoT going into the cellular standards, I think that will bring in some of the biggest technology companies in the world, the people that make the Wi-Fi access points, the people that make the phones, the carriers that sell them. So you can see that Royal Mail may well have has found this incredible way to optimize their part of the business. But there's a bigger picture with even larger global technology companies and CPG and apparel manufacturers and drug companies that could all integrate the same technology, and we could do this end to end. If we kind of zoom in on a few of the next steps, what are the things that you aspire to use the technology to do over the next year or two?
So we have started with the vehicles and asset tracking on the vehicles when they are in transit. We are looking at deploying the same ambient IoT infrastructure, same very devices inside our buildings, so that you just don't have visibility in transit, but also you start to get the visibility within the site as well. Because that's when you could start offering those capabilities or this solution, it's not just about asset tracking or transit. This is also move to time kind of understanding of the items. Mm-hmm. And how do you get that? By knowing it at all times. Mm-hmm. And what we are looking at is some of our larger sites, we are looking to roll this capability out. Depending upon the success, we would want to roll it out to other sites. And hopefully, collectively, I think Wiliot and ourselves, we would have some, I would say, customers who are willing to go us on that journey, because the journey which I mentioned from manufacturing to the doorstep would not be met overnight. I think we have to take chunks out of it. Mm. The immediate chunk would be is what's immediate left to the last leg, which is the item within the customer warehouse. So how do you go into that space? Then you go further left. So I think that's where we want to expand and continue. Royal Mail as a group has a wider, you could say, organization footprint. Whether could we take the learnings and implementations from Royal Mail into the wider group companies? And how do we make it more integrated? Because I think the interconnected world in this sense is essential. Mm. But we go one step at a time, find all the, you could say, hurdles that we find in that space. How do we overcome them? Obviously, the moment you go to item level or those spaces, you'll have to be careful about the security needs, any data protection elements. Mm-hmm. But I think it's a very, very, I would say, never-ending, exciting journey that I think the Ambient IoT would explode into over the coming years.
Very good. And then lastly, sustainability. What are the opportunities from a sustainability point of view with a solution that you've designed?
Key element, immediately, everybody wants to understand the carbon footprint of an item being delivered. So by understanding that at more granular level, you can bring in measures on how do you bring it down. That's the other element of how does this help? First of all, knowing the exact footprint, because that can become a challenge in an untracked environment. Once you understand that footprint, you understand the measures that are required, you understand the hotspot areas, you look at the alternate, you could say, measures that you need to do. Rollmail are already looking at electric vehicles. We are already looking at alternate fuels for the larger trucks.
Well, and your last mile has a good proportion of on-foot delivery.
Absolutely.
So you have one of the lowest carbon footprints for the very last mile. And I think the idea of tracking the carbon for the delivery of a package is super exciting, and being able to share that with customers. And you have so many customers. You have the enterprise customers, but you have every individual in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, 32 million or even more, I would say, addresses that we deliver to, and we promise to deliver at the same price.
So, Nitin, you're like the architect of this amazing, I would say, historic ambient IoT solution. How did you get this job? If someone else wants to architect an amazing, groundbreaking IoT solution, what should they know about how you got to where you are now?
I think the critical bit is identifying what capabilities already exist in your organization and what business problem you're trying to solve.
Yes.
Don't try to introduce new tech just for the sake of it because it's cool, it's modern.
Right.
I think just find that niche within your organization, that what actual business problem would it solve.
But from a career perspective, really, is what I was thinking about. I mean, you grew up in India?
Yep.
What was your education and life experience like?
So, like most Indians, you could say when they're growing up, they want to become a cricketer.
How's your cricket?
Cricket was good, but you can imagine with a billion plus population, the competition is quite high, and then eventually you kind of, you need to fall back on something.
Yeah.
The next interest for me was computer games, playing them all the time. And then that said, I need to do something related to computing and nothing else. So that led to me going to engineering, complete my Bachelor of Technology in Computer Engineering, and then going to the IT industry. So that's effectively, I would say, true for most, you could say, Indian children. So I've not lived a separate life. It's more of a pattern that got followed, and joined one of the big organizations, Tata Consultancy. Was fortunate enough that very early in my, you could say, initial years, I was able to work with the senior leadership over there, and then eventually stayed there for a good long time, and then moved over, transitioned to Rollmail.
So you joined Rollmail as a consultant?
So as a solution architect for them.
Okay.
Effectively, I wanted to continue my technical roles that I have developed over the time. And as you said, build solutions rather than go into the project management, program management. Not that I can't do it, but that didn't generate that interest in me. So effectively, that's what led to kind of a sticking with it. Wanted to join organizations that make the change from within. Because otherwise, if you're a consultant, you get the solution given to you to implement rather than to enforce or to form that vision. And that was my key. How do I get into that space?
Yeah.
Because being a consultant, you can offer remedies, but you don't necessarily get to identify the problem areas. So that was my key for it. Or how can solve the problem areas, or identify first in the first place.
Right.
what are those gaps and how do we kind of find technology or answers around it. And not always technology. Sometimes a simple process change can help with it.
Yeah, you're causing me to reflect on my own career. And I got to Wiliot because I was a consultant, and I was a consultant because I'd started a payments company called Give the Change, which made everything more expensive. So maybe that's why it didn't work out. But it rounded everything up to the nearest dollar, and 100% of the change went to the non-profit that was sponsoring a payment card. Anyway, we were undercapitalized. It didn't work out, but it was an amazing experience. And I had started consulting just to help bootstrap the company.
Yeah.
And I thought I'd hate it, but I ended up loving it. But the thing, because you get so much variety and you get to sort of dip in and you don't have to put up with the politics, you can pretty much say anything. It's just a gig, so you can be super honest. But I really had this feeling of being an outsider, and it was like the kid with their nose on the pane of glass looking in at a family around Christmas. It was like, oh, they have these parties and that culture, and I don't get to be part of that. But the thing I didn't think about was what you said was, as a consultant, you get the terms of reference given to you. But when you're on the inside, then you can potentially define the terms of reference.
Absolutely. And going out into that operational world, that's the biggest change I've seen in myself. As in, when you sit in that, what they call is an ivory tower, that architects or technology sits in ivory tower and defines the solution over there, it does not necessarily translate that well in the operational field. But once you have gone to the operational field, see how things actually work on the ground, then you can come back with, oh, is the solution really going to work?
Yeah.
Because a good solution on paper does not necessarily always translate into something that could be operationalized across thousands of people. You could say, in our case, where we have thousands of customers, thousands of sites, and a good workforce of 140,000 at the peak time.
Wow, that's a lot of people.
How do you roll out a change
Yeah.
that can work for that scale?
Yeah. So you can really be intimate with the problem and the people when you're on the inside. That makes total sense. So before we wrap up the show, we got to go back to something that we started talking about earlier. This, one of the weirdest experiences for me was when I got to talk on BBC News about Wiliot, and you often wonder, what is it like? And I've done a few of these podcasts. I assumed it would be like that, only times 10 or whatever. But the really weird thing was they put you on like a Zoom call, and you can hear what's going on, but you can't see anything. You don't see who you're speaking to. You don't see what's being shown on the news before or after. And so you're really blind. And so I ended up, it was just a very strange experience. It was great. It was like a bucket list thing, being on the BBC. But you had a weird experience as well on the other side of that, didn't you? That was, tell me about what happened to you.
It can't be any more spooky than that. I've been actively working on Wiliot engagement at Rollmill for over 2 years now, but since our initial, you could say, when we connected. I've been, as I said, traveling operational sites, out of an operational site with some of the implementation work, seeing things work on the ground. I would say very patiently sleeping in my bed. I left the TV on. That was that much how I was zoned out that even with the running TV, I just slept. And then very spookily, I woke up. And in front of me, the TV screen had you, mention of Wiliot. And that kind of, you could say in that instant, you wake up because you think, am I still dreaming about something, or is it for real? Because I'm working on something actively, BBC running on, and I see Steve on the screen talking about Wiliot. So it took me a few seconds to realize and then say, oh, that's weird. That's weird. Maybe I think because it probably the destiny was written in the stars. maybe you needed to have some of your fans in the UK watching you on the telly. It was an odd time. I'm not sure whether they would have done multiple iterations of it throughout the day as well.
I think it was on twice, but who's counting? It's the BBC, so that's tick, bucket list fulfilled. But Nitin, how did you find Wiliot?
Yep. I always look for the different technology innovations, some around asset, you could say tracking based, and that's where I stumbled into your podcast, explaining about these new batteryless tags, which work on Bluetooth. It kind of immediately generated that interest. That sounds interesting. We are looking for areas of capabilities within that, and that's where effectively the social media, that revolution kind of led to me discover Wiliot and you.
All right. Well, that's amazing. I love the fact that this podcast was helpful to you as a solution architect. I mean, you are essentially the persona that we target with the podcast, the kind of person, someone that's trying to solve a business problem, wants to understand a broad set of technologies and is architecting the solution. So I'm so glad it worked, and I'm so glad that you built the solution that you did, and that you've been willing to talk to us about it. So Nitin, thank you again for being on the podcast. It's been great to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching this episode of the Mr. Beacon Ambient IoT podcast here on YouTube. You can listen to this episode on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoyed it, please like and share this video. And be sure to subscribe for more videos. For more information about Wiliot, Ambient IoT, and IoT Pixels, head over to wiliot.com.